Hey everyone, it's ZLR here, and today I'm doing my recap on week 13. And man, there was a lot of good games. I went 14 and 2 on my predictions this week. Um, yeah, it was a good week. It was a good week. Um, but anyway, the first game we had was the Lions and the Bears, with the Lions winning at 23-20. That ending was so fucking weird, but I loved it. Every second of it. Um, we had Caleb Williams completing 20 passes out of 39 attempts, 256 yards, and three touchdowns. DeAndre Swift had 11 carries for 39 yards, and Caleb Williams had four carries for 39 yards. DJ Moore had 8 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown. Keenan Allen had 5 receptions, 73 yards, and two touchdowns. DeAndre Swift had 2 receptions for 35 yards. Cole Kmet had 3 receptions for 26 yards. And Rome Odunze had 2 receptions for 25 yards. For the Lions side of things, we had Jared Goff complete 21 passes out of 34 attempts, 221 yards, and two touchdowns. David Montgomery had 21 carries, 88 yards. Jameer Gibbs had 9 carries for 87 yards. Jameson Williams had 2 carries for 18 yards, and Jerry Goff had 1 carry for 1 yard. Amon St. Brown had 5 receptions for 73 yards. Tim Patrick had 2 receptions for 48 yards. David Montgomery had 3 receptions for 36 yards. Jameson Williams had 5 receptions for 28 yards. Jameer Gibbs had 2 receptions for 17 yards. We had Brock Wright with 1 reception for 13 yards. And Sam Laporta with 3 receptions, 6 yards, and two touchdowns. Then we had the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, with the Cowboys winning it 27-20. Right before I get into that though, Aziz Al-Shaair was just suspended for 3 games, and this is actually right before I recorded this segment, and my God, um, it caught me a little bit off guard, but anyway, that hit, yeah, inexcusable. That I don't even want to think about it right now. But anyway, let's just get on to this game. We had Drew Lock, or as Brandon Perna would call him, Horsecock Lock. Um, 21 completions, 32 attempts, 178 yards, and a interception. He also had 4 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 9 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. Devin Singletary had 7 carries for 23 yards, and Malik Neighbors had 1 carry for 4 yards. Malik also had 8 receptions for 69 yards. Nice. Uh, we also had Theo Johnson with 5 receptions, 54 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr. with 2 receptions for 33 yards. Darius Slayton with 2 receptions, 8 yards, as well as Jalen Hyatt. Wandale Robinson had 2 receptions for 6 yards. And for the Cowboys side of things, we had Cooper Rush with 21 completions out of 36 attempts, 195 yards, and a touchdown. Rico Dowdle had 22 carries, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Pretty good game from him. Hunter Lupke uh, had 3 carries for 4 yards. Ezekiel Elliott had 1 carry for 4 yards. How the mighty have fallen. Uh, Cavante Turpin, 1 carry for 2 yards. And Cooper Rush had 5 carries but had 0 yards from that, which is actually kind of funny. Um, Cavante Turpin had 4 receptions, 53 yards. Jalen Tolbert had 2 receptions, 41 yards. CeeDee Lamb had 2 receptions, 39 yards. Uh, Luke Schoonmaker had 5 receptions, 33 yards. Brandon Cooks had 3 receptions, 16 yards, and a touchdown. Rico Dowdle had 3 receptions for 11 yards. Jonathan Mingo had 1 reception for 2 yards. And Jalen Brooks had 1 reception but didn't get anything out of it. Then you got the Dolphins and the Packers in the final Thanksgiving game, with the Packers winning it 30-17. Tua Tagovailoa had 37 completions out of 46 attempts, 365 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert had 5 carries, 19 yards. Devon Achane had 7 carries for 14 yards. And Tua Tagovailoa had 2 carries for 6 yards. They could not run the ball at all. Horrible game for running for them. Jonnu Smith had 10 receptions, 113 yards. Tyreek Hill had 6 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. Devon Achane had 8 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle had 4 receptions for 53 yards. Alec Ingold had 2 receptions for 15 yards, as well as Raheem Mostert. We had Odell Beckham with 1 reception for 9 yards. Malik Washington with 2 receptions for 8 yards. We had Durham Smith with 1 reception for 8 yards, and Julian Hill with 1 reception for 5 yards. Quite a lot of receivers for the Dolphins in that game. Then we had the Packers. Jordan Love completing 21 passes out of 28 attempts, 274 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Josh Jacobs had 19 carries, 43 yards, and a touchdown. We had Chris Brooks with 3 carries for 28 yards. Jaden Reed had 1 carry for 23 yards. And Emmanuel Wilson had 2 carries for 20 yards. Tucker Kraft had 6 receptions, 78 yards. Josh Jacobs had 4 receptions, 74 yards. We had Christian Watson with 2 receptions, 67 yards. We had Dontavian Wicks with 4 receptions, 30 yards. Jaden Reed had 3 receptions, 24 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And we had Chris Brooks with 2 receptions for 1 yard. Then came the Black Friday game with the Chiefs winning that one 19-17 against the Raiders. Raiders were the first team eliminated from the playoffs. From playoff contention, I should say. Um, Aiden O'Connell completed 23 passes out of 35 attempts, 340 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Um, Sincere McCormick had 12 carries, 64 yards. Amir Abdullah had 10 carries, 39 yards. We had Trey Tucker, 1 carry for 11 yards. Brock Bowers had 1 carry for 2 yards. And Aiden O'Connell had 1 carry but got nothing out of it. And when I say first team eliminated from the playoffs, I meant in the AFC. In the NFC, the first team eliminated was the New York Giants, which I forgot to mention when I was talking about them a little earlier. Then we have Brock Bowers, 10 receptions, 140 yards, and a touchdown. Jacoby Myers with 6 receptions, 97 yards. Trey Tucker had 1 reception, 58 yards, and a touchdown. DJ Turner had 1 reception for 25 yards. Amir Abdullah had 2 receptions, 14 yards. Michael Mayer had 1 reception for 5 yards. And Sincere McCormick had 2 receptions for 1 yard. For the Chiefs, we had Patrick Mahomes complete 26 passes out of 46 attempts, 306 yards, and a touchdown. We had Isaiah Pacheco with 7 carries, 44 yards. Kareem Hunt with 7 carries, 15 yards. And Patrick Mahomes with 2 carries for 4 yards. DeAndre Hopkins had 4 receptions, 90 yards. Travis Kelce had 7 receptions, 68 yards. Noah Gray had 4 receptions, 58 yards. Xavier Worthy had 5 receptions, 54 yards. Um, Sam J.P. Ryan had 1 reception for 15 yards. We had Juju Smith with 1 reception for 10 yards. We had Justin Watson with 1 reception, 6 yards, and a touchdown. Isaiah Pacheco had 1 reception for 5 yards, and Kareem Hunt had 2 receptions but got nothing out of it. And then we get to the game where Aziz Al Shair was suspended for his hit on uh on freaking Trevor Lawrence. Got ejected, and just today he got suspended for 3 games. Um, CJ Stroud had 22 completions out of 34 attempts, 242 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Mixon had 20 carries, 101 yards, and a touchdown. CJ Stroud had 5 carries for 7 yards. Nico Collins had 8 receptions for 119 yards. Dalton Schultz had 5 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Tank Dell had 1 reception for 23 yards. Joe Mixon had 4 receptions for 18 yards. John Mechie had 2 receptions for 16 yards. Cade Stover had 1 reception for 4 yards. And Damian Pierce had 1 reception for 1 yard. And um, yeah, pretty close game. Then we had old Mac Jones, McCorkle Jones, 20 completions out of 32 attempts, 235 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He actually didn't do that bad. Oh, dude. He actually had a good game. And Trevor Lawrence, 4 completions out of 10 attempts, 41 yards, and a interception. Travis Etienne had 13 carries for 46 yards. Tank Bigsby had 7 carries for 28 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. had 1 reception for 11 yards. Mac Jones had 3 carries. Oh, did I say a reception for 11 yards? I meant to say a carry for 11 yards. Mac Jones had 3 carries for 6 yards, and Trevor Lawrence had 1 carry for 6 yards. Um, we have Parker Washington, 6 receptions, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Brian Thomas Jr. had 4 receptions, 76 yards, and a touchdown. Evan Ingram had 7 receptions, 41 yards. Devin Duvernay had 2 receptions for 23 yards. We had Brenton Strange with 1 reception for 14 yards. Travis Etienne Jr. with 3 receptions for 12 yards. And Tank Bigsby with 1 reception for 7 yards. Then we had the Colts and the Patriots game. Am I mad about it? A little bit, but do I care that we're eliminated from the playoffs? No, not really. Um, but Colts getting the 1 point win on us. Um, Joey Sly randomly tried to kick a 68-yard field goal at the end of the game and almost made it. Like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? But anyway, we had Anthony Richardson with 12 completions out of 24 attempts, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor had 25 carries for 96 yards. Anthony Richardson had 9 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown. Michael Pittman Jr. had 5 receptions, 42 yards. Alec Ogletree had 1 reception for 22 yards. We had Alec Pierce with 2 receptions, 16 yards, and a touchdown. Mo Alley Cox with 2 receptions, 15 yards. Jonathan Taylor with 1 reception, 7 yards, and a touchdown. And Will Mallory had 1 reception with 7 yards, just like Jonathan Taylor, but excluding the touchdown. Then we had Drake May, 14 completions out of 30 attempts, 238 yards, a touchdown, and a interception. Ramondre Stevenson had 18 carries, 73 yards. Antonio Gibson had 7 carries, 62 yards, and a touchdown. Drake May had 5 carries, 59 yards. And Kendrick Bourne had one carry for 6 yards. Hunter Henry had 7 receptions, 75 yards. Austin Hooper had 4 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Kayshawn Booty had 3 receptions, 41 yards. Kendrick Bourne had 3 receptions, 39 yards. Ramondre Stevenson had 3 receptions, 21 yards. And Demario Douglas with 4 receptions for 20 yards. The 420. Yes, it's finally there. Then we had the Chargers and the Falcons with the Chargers win at 17-13. I think this one was the lowest scoring game of the week, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Um Justin Herbert, 16 completions out of 23 attempts, 147 yards, and J.K. Scott had 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 3 yards. Gus Edwards had 6 carries for 32 yards. Ooh, Kamani Vidal had 4 carries for 20 yards, another 420, and that's right after the Patriots won. Uh, we had Darius Davis with 1 carry for 3 yards, Justin Herbert with 5 carries for 1 yard, and Hassan Haskins had 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. Lad McConkey, 9 receptions, 117 yards. Quentin Johnston with 2 receptions for 12 yards. Did I say carries for Lad McConkey? I meant to say receptions if I did. Um, Joshua Palmer, 1 reception for 11 yards. Stone Smart, 1 reception for 3 yards, as well as Darius Davis. We had Scott Matlock with 1 reception for 2 yards. Gus Edwards and Tucker Fisk both had 1 reception for 1 yard. For the Falcons side of things, we had Kirk Cousins, 24 completions out of 39 attempts, 245 yards, and 4 interceptions. Oh no, Kirk! Oh, bro, that breaks my heart. That breaks me. Bijan Robinson had 26 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Algier had 8 carries, 16 yards. Kirk Cousins had 1 carry for 3 yards. Ray McLeod had 1 carry for -2 yards. And Drake London had 1 carry for -3 yards. Ray McLeod also had 4 receptions for 95 yards. Drake London had 9 receptions for 86 yards. Bijan Robinson had 6 receptions for 33 yards. Darnell Mooney had 3 receptions for 20 yards. We had Tyler Algier with 1 reception for 6 yards, and Charlie Warner with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Seahawks and the Jets, with the Seahawks win at 26-21. We had Geno Smith complete 20 passes out of 31 attempts, 206 yards, and a touchdown. Kenneth Walker had 16 carries for 49 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 4 carries for 28 yards and a touchdown. We had Jackson Smith with 1 carry for 5 yards, and Geno Smith with 1 carry for 2 yards. 2 carries for 2 yards. Sorry about that little mistake. Jackson Smith had 4 receptions, 74 yards. DK Metcalf had 4 receptions for 66 yards. Noah Fant had 3 receptions for 26 yards. Tyler Lockett had 3 receptions, 16 yards. AJ Biner had 2 receptions, 14 yards and a touchdown. Zach Charbonnet had 2 receptions for 13 yards, and Kenneth Walker had 2 receptions but got -3 yards because of it. And for the Jets side of things, we had Aaron Rodgers with 21 completions out of 39 attempts, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. Brees Hall had 12 carries, 60 yards. Braylon Allen had 5 carries for 11 yards. Malachi Corley had 1 carry for 8 yards. Aaron Rodgers had 2 carries for 6 yards. And Isaiah Davis had 1 carry for 4 yards. Devontae Adams had 5 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 41 yards. Uh, Tyler Conklin had 4 receptions, 32 yards. Isaiah Davis had 3 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Braylon Allen had 2 receptions for 16 yards. Uh, Jeremy Ruckert had 1 reception for 3 yards. And Xavier Gibson had 1 reception but got -1 yard because of that. Then we had the Commanders and the Titans, with the Commanders winning it 42-19. Will Levis had 18 completions out of 37 attempts, 212 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Tony Pollard had 8 carries for 35 yards. Tajay Spears had 1 carry for 3 yards. And Will Levis had 2 carries, -3 yards. Uh, Nick Westbrook had 3 receptions, 61 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Calvin Ridley had 2 receptions, 45 yards. Tyler Boyd had 3 receptions for 37 yards. Tony Pollard had 4 receptions for 33 yards. Chig Okonkwo had 3 receptions for 27 yards. Uh, Nick Vanette had 1 reception for 6 yards. We had Josh Weil with 1 reception for 3 yards, and J.C. Latham with 1 reception but got nothing out of it. Then we had Jaden Daniels with 25 completions out of 30 attempts, 206 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a interception. We had Brian Robinson with 16 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. We had Chris Rodriguez with 13 carries, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Jaden Daniels had 9 carries, 34 yards, and a touchdown. Jeremy McNichols had 6 carries for 32 yards, and Diami Brown had 1 carry for 4 yards. Scary Terry had 8 receptions, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Diami Brown had 4 receptions for 35 yards. Zach Ertz had 3 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. We had Noah Brown with 3 receptions for 27 yards. Omalide Zacchaeus with 3 receptions, 14 yards. Luke McCaffrey with 2 receptions, 13 yards. Brian Robinson with 1 reception for 6 yards. And last but not least, we had Ben Sinnott with 1 reception for 3 yards. And then we had the Steelers and the Bengals, with the Steelers winning it 44-38. We have Russell Wilson complete 29 passes out of 38 attempts, 414 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a interception. Najee Harris had 16 carries, 75 yards, and a touchdown. Cordell Patterson had 3 carries for 16 yards. Jalen Warren had 3 carries for 9 yards. Justin Fields had 1 carry for 7 yards. And Russell Wilson had 3 carries for 3 yards. George Pickens had 3 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown. Pat Freiermuth had 6 receptions, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Warren had 4 receptions, 55 yards. Najee Harris had 6 receptions for 54 yards. Van Jefferson had 1 reception for 43 yards. Cordell Patterson had 3 receptions for 37 yards. Calvin Austin had 2 receptions, 29 yards, and a touchdown. Ben Skowronek had 1 reception for 23 yards. Michael Pruitt had 2 receptions for 21 yards. And Darnell Washington had 1 reception for 10 yards. And for the Bengals side of things, we had Joe Burrow, 28 passes completed out of 38 attempts, 309 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a interception. We had Chase Brown with 12 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown. We had Khalil Herbert with 1 carry for 14 yards. We had Joe Burrow with 2 carries, 9 yards. If I said receptions for Chase Brown, I meant to say carries. Jamar Chase, 6 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. T. Higgins, 5 receptions, 69 yards, nice, and a touchdown. Mike Gesicki, 5 receptions, 53 yards. Andre Losavis with 3 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Chase Brown with 3 receptions for 30 yards. We had Tanner Hudson with 4 receptions, 28 yards. And Drew Sample with 2 receptions for 8 yards. For the teams eliminated in the playoffs as of right now, I'll put those right here for you guys to see. Three teams in the AFC and one team in the NFC. Then we had the Cardinals and the Vikings, with the Vikings winning at 23-22. And yes, I did use my phone for my last clip. Um, Kyler Murray, 31 completions out of 45 attempts, 260 yards, a touchdown, and two interceptions. James Conner had 17 carries for 68 yards. Kyler Murray had 7 carries for 48 yards. We had Trey Benson with 3 carries for 20 yards. Uh, Amari Demercado had 3 carries for 12 yards. And Greg Dortch had 1 carry for 6 yards. Trey McBride had 12 receptions, 96 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 5 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. We had Michael Wilson with 5 receptions for 55 yards. Elijah Higgins with 2 receptions for 23 yards. James Conner with 3 receptions for 13 yards. We had Tip Raymond with 1 reception for 9 yards. Amari Demercado with 1 reception for 3 yards. And Greg Dortch with 2 receptions for 1 yard. And for the Vikings side of things, we had Sam Darnold complete 21 passes out of 31 attempts, 235 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had 5 carries, 22 yards. Sam Darnold had 4 carries, 22 yards, as well as Cam Akers. And Ty Chandler had 2 carries for 2 yards. That is a lot of twos. Justin Jefferson, 7 receptions, 99 yards. Jordan Addison, 4 receptions, 54 yards. TJ Hawkinson, 3 receptions, 28 yards. Johnny Munt had 2 receptions, 22 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Naylor had 1 reception for 18 yards. We had Brandon Powell with 1 reception for 8 yards. And Aaron Jones with 3 receptions, 6 yards, and a touchdown. Then we have the Rams versus the Saints, with the Rams winning at 21-14. We had Matthew Stafford, 14 completions out of 24 attempts, 183 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Kyron Williams had 15 carries, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Blake Corum had 8 carries for 42 yards. Puka Nacua had 1 carry for 7 yards. Matthew Stafford had 4 carries for 3 yards. And Tutu Atwell had 1 carry but got nothing out of it. Puka Nacua had 5 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson had 2 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Tutu Atwell had 2 receptions for 39 yards. Cooper Kupp had 3 receptions, 17 yards. We had Colby Parkinson, 1 reception for 13 yards. And Kyron Williams with 1 reception for 9 yards. For the Saints side of things, Derek Carr, 24 completions out of 37 attempts, 184 yards, and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 23 carries, 112 yards. Derek Carr had 2 carries, 12 yards. Taysom Hill, 5 carries for 10 yards. And Kevin Austin with 1 carry for 9 yards. Taysom Hill had 5 receptions for 37 yards. I really hope he's all right. We had Javon Johnson with 5 receptions, 36 yards. Marquez Valdes-Scantling with 2 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. Kevin Austin with 3 receptions for 31 yards. Cedric Wilson Jr. with 1 reception, 19 yards. Alvin Kamara with 4 receptions, 7 yards. Jamal Williams with 1 reception, 7 yards. Frank Foster Moranu with 2 receptions, 6 yards. And Dante Pettis with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Buccaneers and the Panthers go at it, with the Buccaneers winning in overtime 26-23. We had Baker Mayfield complete 21 passes out of 33 attempts, 235 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. And Kyle Trask completed a pass out of 1 attempt for 5 yards. We had Bucky Irving with 25 carries, 152 yards, and a touchdown. Rashad White with 11 carries for 76 yards, and Baker Mayfield with 3 carries for 8 yards. We have Mike Evans with 8 receptions, 118 yards, and a touchdown. Sterling Shepard had 4 receptions for 42 yards. Bucky Irving had 3 receptions for 33 yards. Uh, Jalen McMillan had 2 receptions for 25 yards. We had Cade Otton with 4 receptions for 20 yards. Another 420. Rashad White, 1 reception for 2 yards. And for the Panthers side of things, we have Bryce Young complete 26 passes out of 46 attempts, 298 yards, and a touchdown. Chuba Hubbard had 12 carries for 43 yards. We had Jonathan Brooks with 6 carries for 18 yards, and Bryce Young with 3 carries, 17 yards, and a touchdown. Adam Thielen with 8 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown. We had Tommy Tremmel with 5 receptions, 77 yards. Xavier Leggett with 4 receptions, 53 yards. We had David Moore with 5 receptions, 40 yards. We had Jonathan Brooks with 3 receptions for 23 yards. And Dan Chisna with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Eagles and the Ravens, with the Eagles win at 24-19. We had Jalen Hurts complete 11 passes out of 19 attempts, 118 yards and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 23 carries, 107 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Hurts had 9 carries, 29 yards and a touchdown. And Will Shipley had 1 carry for 4 yards. We had A.J. Brown with 5 receptions, 66 yards. Dallas Goedert with 3 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley with 2 receptions, 10 yards. We had Jahan Dotson with 1 reception for 7 yards. And for the Ravens side of things, we had Lamar Jackson complete 23 passes out of 36 attempts, 237 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 19 carries, 82 yards. Lamar Jackson had 8 carries for 79 yards. Justice Hill had 3 carries for 6 yards. Mark Andrews had 1 carry for 2 yards. And Zay Flowers had 1 carry but got -3 yards because of that. We had Zay Flowers also get 3 receptions for 74 yards. Mark Andrews with 6 receptions, 67 yards, and a touchdown. Isaiah Likely had 5 receptions, 38 yards, and a touchdown. Hunter Henry had 3 receptions, 29 yards. Justice Hill had 4 receptions, 15 yards. And Tylan Wallace had 2 receptions for 14 yards. Then we had Sunday Night Football with the Buffalo Bills and the 49ers, with the Bills winning at 35-10. We have Brock Purdy complete 11 passes out 18 attempts for 94 yards. Jordan Mason, 13 carries for 78 yards. Christian McCaffrey, 7 carries for 53 yards. Both of those guys are injured right now. Christian McCaffrey going to be out for the rest of the year. And Jordan Mason is currently, I think, going to be out for like 4 weeks or something. Isaiah Guerrero, 4 carries, 19 yards, and a touchdown. Brock Purdy, 2 carries, 4 yards. Kyle Juszczyk with 1 carry for -1 yard. Jawan Jennings with 3 receptions, 56 yards. Deebo Samuel with 4 receptions for 20 yards. That's like the 4th 420 I've seen this video. Christian McCaffrey, 2 receptions, 14 yards. George Kittle, 1 reception for 7 yards. And Isaiah Guerrero with 1 reception but got -3 yards because of it. Josh Allen, 13 completions out of 17 attempts, 148 yards and 2 touchdowns, with Mitchell Trubisky throwing it 1 time and completing that pass for 4 yards. We had James Cook, 14 carries, 107 yards and a touchdown. We have Ray Davis with 11 carries, 63 yards and a touchdown. We had Ty Johnson with 5 carries for 28 yards. Josh Allen with 3 carries for 18 yards and a touchdown. We had Curtis Samuel, 1 carry for 7 yards. And Mitchell Trubisky with 4 carries for -3 yards. Dawson Knox had 2 receptions, 56 yards. Khalil Shakir had 4 receptions for 30 yards. We had Quentin Morris with 1 reception for 14 yards. James Cook had 1 reception for 13 yards. Amari Cooper had 3 receptions for 12 yards, and also uh, and also uh, tossed the ball back to Josh Allen after he threw it, so Josh Allen could get 7 yards and the touchdown, which means he practically gave himself the ball because it counted as a receiving touchdown for him and a passing touchdown. So that's pretty funny. Um, we had Ty Johnson with 1 reception for 9 yards. Mac Hollins with 1 reception for 7 yards. I already mentioned Josh Allen. And Ray Davis had 1 reception for 4 yards. And last but not least, we had one of the craziest Monday Night Football games I've seen in a while, with the Broncos winning it 41-32 against the Browns. Man, if you ever seen a Jameis Winston game, you would know that this was definitely a Jameis Winston game. Um, 2 pick sixes, another interception that went like halfway down the field. Um, a few very long touchdown passes. There was like a 93-yard one. Then Jerry Jeudy had like a 70-yard touchdown. He also broke a record for most receiving yards against a former team, breaking Terrell Owens' record back in 2008 when he went up against the 49ers and got 213 yards on them. Um, but anyway, let's talk about this game. We had Jameis Winston complete 34 passes out of 58 attempts, 497 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Forgot to say that too. He almost had 500 yards passing, which is crazy, but he did have over 500 yards total. Uh, Jerome Ford had 9 carries for 41 yards. Nick Chubb had 9 carries for 21 yards. Jameis Winston had 3 carries for 11 yards. Kadarius Toney had 1 carry for 3 yards, and Elijah Moore had 1 carry for 1 yard. Jerry Jeudy with 9 receptions, 235 yards and a touchdown. Elijah Moore with 8 receptions for 111 yards. David Njoku with 9 receptions, 52 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We have Michael Woods with 3 receptions, 43 yards. Nick Chubb with 2 receptions, 24 yards, and a touchdown. Jerome Ford had 1 reception for 21 yards. Whew. And Jamari Thrash had 2 receptions for 11 yards. For the Broncos side of things, we had Bo Nix, 18 completions out of 35 attempts, 294 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. We had Jaleel McLaughlin with 14 carries, 84 yards. Audric Estime with 3 carries for 12 yards. Bo Nix with 3 carries for 4 yards. Marvin Mims Jr. with 1 carry for 4 yards. Javonte Williams with 4 carries for 1 yard and a touchdown. And Michael Burton with 1 carry, 1 yard, and a touchdown. We had Marvin Mims with 3 receptions, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Cortland Sutton with 6 receptions, 102 yards. Troy Franklin with 2 receptions, 28 yards. Lucas Kroll with 3 receptions, 24 yards. Nate Atkins with 1 reception, 16 yards, as well as Devon Vele. Javonte Williams had 1 reception for 3 yards, and Jaleel McLaughlin had 1 reception but got nothing out of it. And that is going to do it for week 13 of the NFL. And tomorrow, my week 14 predictions will be out. So Hope to see you all there tomorrow. And as always, like, subscribe, comment, do what really you want to do. Also, check out my gaming channel because there's going to be more videos coming out on that soon. But as always, I'll see you all in the next one. See you around.